All right, good morning, everyone. How's everyone doing? Yay! How many of you are not on the New York time zone? Okay, you're all good. Okay, you guys. Okay, good. I feel a little better. I am 3 hours behind, so this is, I think, around 6:30 a.m. for me. So if I fall asleep randomly, make sure to make really loud noises, and I'll wake back up and continue the presentation. So first off, could everyone hold up their cell phones really quick? Oh, some of you guys are quick as straws in the West. All right, great. Well, the faster you guys held them up, the more you were cyborgs. So I'm going to talk about two things. I'm going to talk about ambient location and the future of the interface, and go over a bit of cyborg anthropology, which is something that I currently study. So first, I have to tell you that you all are cyborgs. Not RoboCop and not Terminator, but every time you interact with a device using the interface that is your eyes, you're part human and you're storing your thoughts outside of yourself in something else, or integrating something from your environment that's been made by someone into your mind. So when most people think of cyborgs, they think of these mecha machines and they think of brain implants, but in reality, the word cyborg came from a 1960 paper on space travel. And this was the definition: an organism to which exogenous components had been added for the purpose of adapting to new ambient environments. Basically, a guy wearing a spacesuit was putting on exogenous components in order to adapt to a new environment of space. And technically, humans are very strange. They like to be able to go underwater and breathe like a fish using scuba diving equipment, and they like to be able to go into space. And now everyone's kind of turned into this inner world of the internet that's technically completely invisible unless you have a portal that allows you to access it. And so the reason that I study it is not that we haven't been cyborgs for a long time with our first tools, but that these first tools have always been extensions of our physical selves. So like a hammer allows you to hit something harder, or a knife allows you to cut something. And if it breaks, it's not a big deal, you get another knife. If you're a saber-toothed tiger and your tooth breaks, you can't just make a new one and attach it to your face. You probably end up having a very sad ending as a saber-toothed tiger. So the reason that I study this is because all of this has been physical for a very long period of time, all of our extensions of self. And now suddenly we have these mental extensions of self, where we technically, our consciousness kind of goes into something like a mobile phone and connects to somebody else on the other side of the world, and we're connecting completely mentally almost. And the other thing is that, for the most part, if you look at a tool over 3,000 years, nothing really has changed to what it looks like and how it's used. It's very stable as an object. But if you look at a computer, even in the last 50 years, you wouldn't be able to tell what that did. I mean, that giant computer there had less calculating capability than one of those mini calculators that you get out of a vending machine that's for kids with sparkles on it and tiny little buttons. I mean, it's completely different. And if you look at this phone and you brought it back in time, it would look like a witchery device, like a scrying pool that you could call up anything from anywhere in the world by the touch of a button and see it on YouTube. And the other thing that happens is there's this kind of automatic production of space. You can put all sorts of things into a device, and it doesn't get heavier. And technically, if you filled up a room full of information and papers, it would be enormous. So there was this project where they took someone's 8 years of digital photos from their laptop, and they printed it out. They said, how much are you really carrying around with you? How much is invisible? How much is kind of this Mary Poppins bag that you deal with in your everyday life? And so they printed it out, and it looked like this. This is 8 years of photos, all in one. And so when your computer crashes and you feel this irrevocable sense of loss, it's probably because there's this invisible stuff that you didn't realize that you lost, and it's attached physiologically to your brain. So that's kind of the difference between what we've seen before and what we see now. And so a traditional anthropologist will go out to another country, generally to a field site, to a small village, and they'll say, how fascinating these people are, how interesting, and then they will write up their papers and they will take it back to a university and kind of think of themselves as the other. Well, we're this first world and these are this different world and we're different. Whereas a cyborg anthropologist looks at the world around them and basically says, how interesting these people are. We have these little devices in our pockets, and they cry, and we have to pick them up and soothe them back to sleep. And then we have to feed them at night by plugging them into a wall and making sure they're protected. And if they don't work, it's because we forgot to upgrade them. So we keep having to upgrade these external devices all of the time. So that's kind of an overview of how I look at the world. And the two different things I look at after that is history and the future. What have people done 30 or 40 years ago that we still don't have today that were really bizarre? So I'll go over some history. Has anyone seen this person or know who he is? Okay, good. Oh, he knows. Yes, great. So this is Steve Mann, and this is him in 1981. He has, if you can look up there, he has some antennas sticking out of his head, and that's because he put metallic gel on his hair so he could conduct a signal from the building at the MIT campus that he hacked into, crawled on top of, and installed a wireless access point. So he basically made wireless internet at MIT so that he could have wireless internet as he was walking around the campus. And so he would walk around with about 80 pounds of computing equipment on, and a miniature camera stuffed into his eye, and another camera on his other eye, and he would be able to live stream his reality he did this for about 3 years straight. And during this time when he was putting metallic gel on his hair in the morning to conduct a signal, he met his future wife. And their first date was they sat down with each other, and he had a video camera on and an input device in an eye, and she had one on an input device in her eye, and they had the date in each other's perspectives. So he watched himself, and she watched herself, and I guess it was a match made in heaven. But it basically took him an entire year before he could convince somebody else to wear a computer, well, basically 80 pounds of equipment around campus all day. But there were a number of benefits, which I'll tell you about in a moment. By the way, if you're interested in wearable computing, he wrote this paper called The Wearable Camera, and this was really the earliest example of this. The only other earliest example of real wearable computing was, I think in 1979, a bunch of students went into a casino with cameras in their shoes, and they figured out how to beat the casino. But he was using this more as a social statement. So one of the things that Steve Mann hated was that he had to walk around and in the world see other people's messages instead of his own. He didn't want to see other people's advertising, other people's messages. He wanted to see his own. He said, well, why do I have to get interrupted all the time? So he made a display that he looked through, and what it would do is recognize an ad and cancel it out and put a white sheet over it, and then he could get a text message on it. Of course, there wasn't text message, so it was an email. So his wife is watching his real-time view of reality through her heads-up display, through his heads-up display, and texting him that he went in the wrong direction and that he should turn left on Bay Street. And he doesn't have to look down at his device ever. He just walks around, and every billboard and every ad and every sign shows this text. And it's fantastic because, well, he called this diminished reality. You don't want to augment reality because it means that there's too much. There's already so much reality. You want to take out the bits that you don't like. So he then applied this to supermarkets. So when Steve Mann walks into a store, he doesn't see all of the merchandise because it's kind of a pain in the neck to go shopping, honestly. You have too many choices. So he just crosses out all the things that he doesn't want, and he never sees that brand again. And so he walks into a store, and there's just a bunch of green objects. Okay, I'll get that one, that one, that one, that one, that one. And it kind of goes against everything that stores stand for, wasting your time and making you buy more. So if you think about this enough, you think, well, how does he type back to people, right? Obviously, he can't just carry around a big keyboard like this. I mean, he already looks pretty awkward, but it would be even more awkward to kind of type like this, because you'd have to look at your keys. So instead, he used this one-handed keyboard device, and you play it like a guitar, and you have different chords, and each different chord is a different letter, and then you can program it so you can have entire paragraphs that show up. So he, today, if you go to Toronto, Canada, because he can no longer fly on planes because he's attached to a bunch of electronic equipment, you can see him walk down the street and he'll be click, 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 60 words a minute. He wrote his dissertation through this little device while walking through a park. He said the problem is when you get those really neat insights in life, you usually you're walking somewhere, you're on the road, you're in the middle of doing something else, and you can never get to a computer and write. And he said, why should people have to go like this over a computer and kind of conform to the computer? He said the computer should conform to the human and just be symbiotic and then, add to somebody's life. So he edits Wikipedia as he walks down the street. He's waiting for a red light to turn green, and he just edits, and he can see the Wikipedia article on his heads-up display in his right eye, and then he just types, and then hits the save button and walks across the street. So you can actually see him as a user on Wikipedia. Here's another example where he was trying to do some research. So he said, well, I'll just put the research paper on all the billboards as I walk by. So he's reading a page at a time on the billboard. And then here's another example. His wife could leave him location-based messages, basically. And they didn't have any location infrastructure at that time. It's quite difficult to do this. So he just used the image recognition of the Star Market, and whenever he saw a Star Market logo, then he would get this message. And his wife said, pick up the 2% milk. It's very obvious, regular, everyday things. But the main thing about Steve Mann is that even though he wore 80 pounds of computer equipment, he said that one day, computers are getting smaller and smaller and evaporating, so I don't have to worry about this. He said, it's just going to get lighter and lighter. So here's an example of him in 1980 with 80 pounds of equipment, and then 40, and then 20, and then 10, and then by 1998, he looks kind of cool. He's got like sunglasses on, and he's been able to miniaturize all of that equipment. His current rig actually looks like this. It looks almost like regular glasses. It's about $500,000 worth of equipment. It's quite expensive, and it does all sorts of biometric monitoring, so he knows if his blood sugar is low or his heartbeat is up, and he just kind of is connected to everything. So how this works is there's a video camera on the right side, there's a processing loop around the back of his head, and then an input into his other eye. And the processing loop overlays everything on reality for him and allows him to see. And he says it's really important to have just one eye being attached to a computer because, if you got a blue screen in both eyes, well, you probably just fall over and fall down the stairs. So you want to make sure it goes into one eye. He goes through this in great detail. So this is something that was done in the 70s and 80s. And as far as I know, it's still not out there in everyday life. Some of my friends and I have a bet, if this type of thing becomes normal in 10 years, then you owe us like $5,000. We made it this like giant thing because inflation, in 10 years, $5,000 won't be worth anything anyway. So, but the other thing is that at Park Research, they were doing a lot of this as well, but they were doing it in a kind of non-visual way. So this is more of a visual augmented reality where you're augmenting your perception of reality. So now I'm going to go into an overview of the future, which is technically today, and kind of what people were talking about in the 70s at Park Research. They're most known for making the printer that everyone has, the Xerox printer. But it was a major place for people to think about the future of technology and interfaces. So there was this man there called Mark Weiser, and he thought of this idea called calm technology. He said that technology should not get in the way of life. Technology should be there when it's needed and get the heck out of the way when it's not. And it should recede into the background. And that's how technology should be. And for the majority of our lives with technology, you have to deal with crappy interfaces, and it's been a real pain in the neck. And because of that, people think that they're bad at technology, but in reality, technology is really bad at humans. And the only thing that can help is interface design to try and bridge that enormous gap between how computers understand reality and how humans understand reality. So when I was little, I started to think about this. I said, okay, all the buttons at that time were physical. So if you wanted to rewire what a button did, you'd go into the back of the machine and you'd futz with the circuitry and you'd figure out, okay, now the button does this, and you press it. But then the liquid interface came about, as you can see in the iPad, where a button can appear anywhere on the screen. It's an infinite amount of buttons. It's liquid. So I said, let's look at the water cycle. So it's solid, liquid, air. I said, well, what kind of button would be invisible? What kind of button would be triggered simply by walking into it? And so I determined that calm technology would be, your actions would be the button. You walking down the street, you walking into your house, you walking into a store, you going fast or slow, you running into somebody that you know but you didn't know, and that these interfaces would be completely invisible. And so they would just occur, and you wouldn't have to look at your phone, bring up an app, and decide that you needed to do something at a location. It would just give that information to you. And so I waited for this to happen. I said, great, we're going to have this fantastic, smooth, wonderful time with technology, now that everyone knows that interaction design's a great thing. But instead, I saw stuff like this, and this pissed me off. This is Alice in Wonderland, a great classic book, and it's done on the iPad, but you have to physically, with your finger, move this crappy animation of a crappy-looking page, and then halfway through, the page like slaps back into place, and it's not very fun. It doesn't take advantage of the interface at all. And I saw people trying to use these old analogies of how the real world works and try to put them into these new devices without even caring. I said, you can do these amazing things with this device. Why are you using these old metaphors for reality? So I determined that there should be this new field of interface design called superhuman interface design, where the whole point is to make you feel like a superhuman, that you are in control over the information, that you are relaxed, that you can browse it, that it's doing the work in the background for you and presenting you with something that you might like, and you, as the end user, get to choose what you like. So this is Flipboard, and it opens from the center, and then you click the button, or you just click the right side of the page, and it seamlessly loads, because they load a bunch of content in the background and a bunch of other content on the right side. So you never have weird lag issues, and you never have to wait for some stupid animation of a page to flip over. So I thought that if you were to print this out, it's impossible to have this as an object. It would be like an infinite Rolodex that kept having pages added to it. And because of that, this is an interface that takes advantage of what you can do on a new liquid interface. But then I started to think of non-visual type interfaces. So this is a haptic compass belt. You wear it around your belt, and wherever it's facing north, it buzzes you. So you always get buzzed to which direction is north. So, buzz. And there's a German who invented it, and he wore it for 6 weeks. And he started riding his bike to school or to college, and he would ride it to work, and then he would ride it home. And he found out that he started to have this kind of sixth sense. He always knew where north was, and then he always knew where home was, and then he always knew where that lake that he liked visiting was. And he started to have this enormous map of reality in his brain because it wasn't visual, because he never had to look at a map anymore. And he said, this is very curious. He said, well, I wonder if this works, in other situations. So he started going to sleep at night, and he would have dreams where he was bicycling around, and there was the buzzing in his dream, the belt. And at that point, he said, okay, I'm going to stop this experiment and take off this belt. But a number of other people tried it. So I tried this out. This me looking really dorky wearing this belt in the picture. But the main thing about it is that I really wanted to have directions that would buzz you. So you're driving a car, you get buzzed like once if you need to take a right, and then buzzed twice if the right turn is coming up, and then left, and then so that you get this. I know that a lot of you probably drive in a car and you have your little iPhone or Android device, and you're trying to look at the directions as you freak out and try to merge onto a lane. It's very dangerous. But if it just buzzed you, it wouldn't take anything away from reality. It would compress that visual stimulus into a completely other sense and allow you to fully live visual reality, and I think that would be a lot safer. So then I looked at some other non-visual interfaces. So this woman, Kelly Dobson, she said, why do we try to teach machines our language? Why don't we learn their language? So she made this blender. And when she wanted the blender to turn on, instead of clicking the on button, she would just go up to the blender and go, and the blender would start, and then, you just, and then, and so she did this with a bunch of different objects. And it was kind of funny because for a long time in the domestic appliance space, there was always like lights on, lights off, or the clapper. But the problem is, if somebody in the dorm next to you has a clapper and a bunch of voice-activated stuff, you can just yell and turn all their lights off. So, you're next to them, like, clap, clap, and the lights off, and then, oh, I was doing my homework, And so I had my dad would always buy me a bunch of weird junk, or rather it was hand-me-down junk. He's like, well, I really don't like this module that I bought like 10 years ago that is voice-activated. Why don't you hang out with it? So I started installing all this stuff in my room, and I figured out voice-activated stuff sucks because there's always stuff going on in the background. Maybe you're listening to music. Maybe you're walking down the street. You don't want to voice-activate your phone because some guy's talking loudly on his phone next to you, and he's going to interrupt your conversation, and you're going to call 911 instead of the pizza place. So there's all sorts of ways that this could go wrong, which is why I like text. And so I thought either you have a text message on your phone where you text your lights to go off, because you always have your phone and that turns into a remote control, or you have kind of a low-level language for machines where you growl at your blender, or you have some sort of voice command for your washing machine. And a lot of them, when they start to talk, it's really creepy, but instead, if you look at a Roomba, when it's done cleaning the floor, it goes ding. It's like it's happy that it has done this thing, and it's like this cute toy, and people start treating the Roombas like their own cats. They start protecting them, defending them, talking about them when they're in the room, and I found that becomes the most human. And the other thing is cats like to hang out on top of Roombas, so they've successfully become an object. But in reality, it's not very foreign. If you look at trilobites, which were basically the filter feeders of the Precambrian era, they look just like Roombas, and there's even some trilobite-type Roomba vacuums. It's just an animal that filter feeds that's also powered by a machine. And so it's not very unnatural at all. But then I thought, well, what other interfaces are missing? And I thought, well, one is touch. So I looked at this. This is a vest that you wear, and it's attached to a video game. And if somebody wants to play the video game, they have to give you a back massage. So like if they're pressing the A and B button, they're like, ah, and you're like, oh, that feels great, thanks. And they're like, I just won. And you're like, yeah, you better have won. And so I thought that a lot of the touch that was missing, should be something explored, because everyone is exploring visual augmented reality. So then I said, what if you combine touch, or what if you combine like buzzing and haptic and non-visual interfaces and invisible buttons, and you turn them into a game? So I got kind of a team together, and we made this game called Map Attack. We said, what if we made a real-life game of Pac-Man, where you ran around the streets, and there were these invisible circles that you had to collect, and whoever got the most circles won. But you could only see them on your phone, and you'd have to split up into teams, and then red and blue team would be against each other. And so we built it. It took quite a while. We had to build an entire geo platform to build it on, which was ridiculous. But we finally got it to work, so we called it Map Attack. And the first time we really tested it was at Stanford University. So I made this map of a bunch of virtual GPS circles that you could run into on Stanford, and I'd never been there before. So I sit there with this editor on Google Maps, and I'm putting dots everywhere and 50 pointers, and we get to the campus, and a bunch of the dots are in a construction zone, and no one can get to them, and they're all the high-level dots, right? So all these guys are trying to get to 50 pointers. They're like, I can't get in here. And so they start handing their phones to construction workers. They're like, can I just give you my phone? And the construction worker's like, yeah, I'll take your phone. And he's like, wait, what am I doing with this? And he's like, just stand here and wait for it to say, you got 50 points. And so the construction worker's like, and he's like, I got 50 points, yeah. And then afterwards, they all got into these giant discussions. The construction workers said, none of these Stanford kids have ever stopped to talk to us. They've always been heads down in their phones. They've never run around. They've never hung out on campus and talked to anybody else. And this is the first time we've talked to anyone. What the heck are you guys doing? And like, we're playing Pac-Man. And so he was all excited. And so another one of the issues that came out of this is that everyone ran 3 miles or 4 miles, but they didn't notice it. Because it was like being a kid again. You had this goal and you had to go after it, and heck, you had to run a lot, and you didn't really care at the end because your team won and you were happy and you were really tired. And so that was kind of me wanting to get out of the house and in front of the computer and actually do something in reality. So then we said, let's make some other kind of games, since we have this entire game engine that we ended up building for this. So we made this flash mob game. Everyone has to get to a shape at the same time and activate these little points, zones, and then if you do, you all get a prize. Great. So we went and did these at hackathons. And then I really hated sending letters in the physical mail, so I started making a string of points. So I would get a 50-pointer if I got to the mailbox. So I'd run down the street and try to get to the mailbox as fast as I could and mail the letter. And I realized that, wow, I'm really not motivated by much. All I have to do is put virtual points on there. So then we made this point runner game where you can make your own running trail and then get points as you run. It was really simple. But then we said, well, what else can we do? Now that we have all these virtual geofences, these invisible interfaces, we said, well, what if we took a giant data set? We thought, what's a really big data set? What about all of the Wikipedia articles with GPS coordinates on them? And what if we made them all into zones, and the entire world became a living, breathing Wikipedia article? So if anywhere in the world you were, you turn on this little layer in this app that we built called Geoloki, and you'd walk around, and if there was a Wikipedia article nearby, it would push it to you. And it'd be like, hey, you just walked by the building that does this. And we realized that a lot of people were trying to make apps that you had to physically go in front of the building and then click on the search button or hold up the camera and wait for the layers to load and then finally see your object. And you always had to remember that you had to open the app there. And we said, well, what if the app just tells you, like, you just walked by this thing? So I had lived in Portland for 5 or 6 years, and I walked by this building and it said, this is the Waverly Building. It was built in 1856 by an ice cream tycoon. Apparently there was a guy who invented the ice cream cone and he built this building. I had no clue. And so I was excited about it. You know, it added this whole new layer onto reality. But then we said, well, what if other people build on it? So this one guy came in, we ran a hackathon, and he used our platform to take all of the restaurant inspection scores and put them into the app. And then whenever you walked by a restaurant that had a really bad review, it would tell you to not eat that. So it was the don't eat that app. So we had fun with that. I think that wouldn't be commercially viable. We'd get sued a lot if we released that. So the whole point of all of this was that your phone should become this kind of remote control for reality. You have it with you all the time. You should be able to program interesting things with it. And so we started to think, what else can you do? So since we're obsessed with location, we put a GPS circle around our place. We said, when your phone detects that you're in this geofence, this invisible interface, automatically tell your house to turn on the lights, and then when you leave, the lights should automatically turn off. So when I get home, it's never dark, and then when I leave, I don't have to remember to turn off the lights, so it automatically conserves energy. Which is this nice way of just automating this one very simple aspect of life. And of course, the light switch is already there, and you can turn off the app if you don't want to have it trigger, but it's just convenient. But then we hooked up other stuff to it, so now the computer says, welcome home when you get home, on like a 3-minute trigger delay. But the whole point of this is to make this kind of interface disappear, where you don't have to have as many actions as before. You take away some of the actions in the system and kind of push them to people. And that, a query, so you asking if something's nearby, is kind of reduced. And so this is all kind of trying to bring Mark Weiser of Park Research vision to life. He died, probably around a decade ago, and it was really upsetting because he never got to see any of the stuff that he created ever show up in real life. And I said, this is not fair. Let's do this. Now the technology's there. We can make invisible interfaces. We can help to kind of automate things and get rid of these annoying interfaces that are in the way. So as a final point, the best technology should be invisible and just get out of the way and connect people, allowing them to be more human. And if it gets in the way, it's bad interface. Or it's a wonderful and beautiful interface that you want to interact with. But in that case, it better be a damn good interface. So eventually, no longer this, but this. These are people who just won points playing the map attack game. So with that, thank you very much. So at 11:45, we'll be meeting at the statue in Columbus Circle to play a real-life game of Pac-Man. If you want to play the game that I talked about, just download the Map Attack app for iPhone or Android. It'll work on 2.2 and higher for Android and 3GS and higher for iPhone. If you want to play, make sure you have it downloaded and arrive right away. We have sack lunches and drinks for you. And then we'll be launching the platform that I talked about at the Business Innovation and Education Lab tomorrow. So thanks again.